رسول الله عليه وصحبه وسلم. Okay. So, how you brothers doing? Okay, alhamdulillah. It's nice to see you again. Alhamdulillah, I had a great time with you guys last night. Allah accept from you your salah, all of your ibadah, your fasting, your itikaf here, this is, mashallah, you guys are spending your time very well here. Alhamdulillah, it's such a blessing to have a space like this and to have each other. Allah accept from all of you. Keep you firm, keep all of us firm. Let us finish this month strong. Alhamdulillah, everything that we've done up to this point, Allah accept it from us and let us finish, with a good ending. SubhanAllah, I think we'll miss Ramadan. It has its challenges, of course, it should, as it should. But so much blessing, so much light, so much joy that comes with it. It's some of our teachers talk about it as a guest, a treasured guest. When they leave, we miss it. So right up until the last moment, right up until that final Maghrib, that time for Maghrib comes in, just let's do our best. And I'm reminding myself first, to try to make the most of it. Try to take up these blessings as best as we can. Sorry? It goes fast, right? SubhanAllah. It goes fast. It goes so fast. We're so excited for it to come in, and we're excited to get started, and then it goes by. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah for everything, for another Ramadan. Allah accept from us. So yesterday so I know some of the brothers wasn't here yesterday. If I were to give like a very short, we covered a lot of ground yesterday. I'll put it this way: our big picture was, our big intention was, to understand spiritually and even historically, how we could approach politics. I don't like the word, but political work, social work, the rectification of society, really, as Muslims, from within our own understanding, from within our tradition, on the method of the Prophet ﷺ and his inheritors, That's the one-liner, I guess. We covered a lot of ground, from, I tried to mention some points, really we started with the creation of Adam alayhi salam, didn't we? And with that purpose in mind, tried to have an understanding of Islam that also allowed us to deal with difference, that allowed us to think of ourselves with a unity, of the Muslims, and looked at some of the challenges to that. And then we did a very brief history, like an outline form history of colonialism, of Khilafah, as well as colonialism. We finished our discussion around World War I and the end of the Ottoman Khilafah and the birth of the nation state, or not the birth, but the establishment of the nation state within the Muslim lands, and the creation of new identities, and Turkey, but new, especially, more generally, identities that became divisive, and politically divided, the decision-making of the Muslims. And then, of course, it goes deeper than that over time. That was where we left it yesterday. I'm kind of ringing here. Where's the speaker? Oh, it's over there. I think it's okay if it's like this, right? I just have to point it away from the speakers. It's okay. Oh, is that on? Not doing okay. Good. So today we talked a lot yesterday. I talked a lot yesterday. And thank you for your patience yesterday. I hope some of it was useful, inshallah. We had a little time for discussion afterwards. Today I'm going to try to talk less. There's just a few more notes I thought we could kind of finish with, and then we can spend the rest of our time is yours. If there's more things that you want to discuss, I would love that, inshallah. So, and of course, this is This is the 25th night, so of course you also definitely want to spend more time by yourself, with your own reflections and your own prayers and your own reading, inshallah. So I'll try to respect that as well. Now, in this period from, say, the late 1800s, using the Christian calendar, unfortunately, just to make it kind of more familiar, from the late 1800s, into the early 1900s, this is a period when, piece by piece, of course, the Muslim world is falling under the authority of, falling under the control of various European powers. I think they're all European. No, I guess then you also have Russia, Chinese, in Central Asia, but various other powers, various foreign powers, non-Muslim powers. The ulama, like broadly speaking, I'm speaking very broadly, the case studies are much more interesting. But if we're just looking at trends, in this period, there are, of course, ulama, people of religious authority and knowledge, who do lead the charge, take a role in opposing, this occupation, right? Because our understanding is that it was their understanding that, when a piece of Dar al-Islam is occupied, when an invader has entered the lands of the Muslims, that it's an obligation, of course, to try to remove them, We talked about Philistine, we talked about Quds in the period of, the 1100s, 1200s, culminating in Salahuddin. They had a long vision, it was an occupation of Quds longer than the one that we're witnessing now. And they kept the vision, they had that understanding that this was upon the Muslims to reverse this, to take it back. On the other hand, though, there were some ulama that made compromises, or that took positions, with some of these colonial authorities, with some of these occupiers, and they had their reasonings, they made their ijtihad to, for the sake of peace, perhaps, for the sake of some security. I'm trying to be empathetic. Obviously, this isn't my position personally. It's just, but this is, I want to honor our ancestors here, and not judge them from too far a distance. As the nation states, or as the borders and the way that they were divided in the colonial period, as they became nation states through the anti-colonial period, into the post-colonial period, perhaps, many of those borders did not shift very much. And there were some movements, spiritual movements, political movements that did maintain a global vision. Some of them maintained a regional vision. Some of them, because of language and because of identity, were able to maintain more influence within a certain sphere, or a certain language sphere, or ethnic kind of sphere. Eventually, even many of those then became focused more, you see this even up until the current day, more interested in national struggles. And I mentioned yesterday, that the national identities at certain times in those anti-colonial conflicts, it was felt, that the strength of a national identity, the smaller unit, that the national identity offers, gave them something of an asabiya, which might have facilitated that decolonization. That's the positive side, I guess, inshallah. But good or bad, these identities became firmly rooted. Many of these nations, were left underdeveloped. They were left, plundered, really. Underdeveloped makes it sound like it's their fault. Many of these places were plundered, really, by the colonial occupiers. They were underdeveloped, and then they were plundered further by many of the national elites that inherited power, or that took power when the foreign occupiers left. Then, many of them became caught up in the machinations of Cold War superpowers. So you understand, after World War II, the two main poles of the world become this Western bloc and this Eastern bloc, divided between the U.S. and Western Europe on one side, and the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe on the other side. And then the rest of the world becomes something like a chessboard for them to just harass each other with. And yeah, there would be zones of influence, basically, where, if one government were perceived as shifting towards one side, the other would try to undermine that and back and forth, resulting in sometimes just literal invasions, but also even more subtle things like coups and military coups and intelligence operations, assassinations, many assassinations in this time. I mean, the list of just the CIA, I say as an American, I mean, we should really look at how the American government dealt with this. I mean, the list is very long, of all of the CIA, intelligence operations, that happened over those decades, many of them in the Muslim world. From the 1960s, I mean, even before that, but especially from the 1960s, you find that U.S. foreign policy revolves around just really a few poles, like really a few, like pillars, kind of which is, one is the Soviets, two is oil, and three is Israel. This is something that didn't have to be that way, but it was something that became very central to how the U.S. saw its role, in the Muslim world. Now, in this period, the darkness of this period is a lot of what our parents and grandparents fled from, what they left behind, seeking a better life, here or wherever they went, different places around the world. At the same time, and within the Muslim world, you find a rise of different ideologies to empower that resistance, or to different ideologies, even if it's no longer framed in anti-colonial resistance, but new visions for ways to rectify society. Sometimes it's a secular nationalism, sometimes it was a leftism, Marxism, or some version of that. There were times, when the Muslims, in the context of the Cold War, there were times when Muslims shared an enemy with one side or another. There were times when, to the Muslims of a place, the U.S. was the greater enemy, and so, they received some support, from the East. There were Muslims for whom the Soviet Union was the greater enemy or the more pressing enemy, and so they received some and accepted some support from the West. But in the end, principled Muslims, didn't stop short of sovereignty for themselves, ruled by Islam. Islam, in that period, throughout those decades, many of the Western social scientists thought that religion was on the decline. That the period of a religion being the main identity or the source of ethics, they thought that this was over. Partly because of what the Christian world had gone through, and because for them it was over, with the exception of America. America was always this weird counterexample to Europe. Europeans were always very confused by America and why America was so religious compared to the rest. But broadly, the plan had been set in motion already in much of the world. That religion was on the decline, but Islam was never, just didn't happen. To Islam and there's a number of interesting episodes, from the 50s onward, which like kind of illustrate, and I'll just do them in outline form. I really encourage you to kind of read these histories yourselves. It's not our primary purpose here, but I want to just give you a sense of the trend. In the 1950s, in Iran's a very important case study in the turning of the last century. For a number of reasons. One of those famous, like really the textbook CIA, operation, in the 1950s, was in response to the election of a prime minister in Iran named Mohammad Mossadegh. Have you ever heard this name before? Yeah, okay, cool. Okay, so the short version is that, he came into the prime ministership. This is under a secularizing, quote unquote, modernizing, westernizing monarchy. The son of Reza Pahlavi, now the son's name is Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, who had been installed, the father had been installed during World War II. Excuse me, he had been installed earlier, the son was installed in World War II. The Mohammad Mossadegh, in response to a really bad deal that the Iranian state had set up with Western oil companies, Western oil companies were just plundering the oil resources of the country amidst just widespread poverty in the country. Mohammad Mossadegh announced, with popular support, that they would nationalize, that they would renegotiate this agreement, that they would nationalize the oil resources of the country, so that the profits of it would go to the people of Iran. In response to that, one of the main beneficiaries of the main oil company was the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which is now called British Petroleum, BP, same company basically. British, the MI5, stressed by this, of course, convinced, the way the narrative is told is that they convinced the US to come along with this. And the CIA did. An agent by the name of Roosevelt, Kermit Roosevelt. I don't think Kermit was his real name, but it's a funny nickname. Kermit Roosevelt. This is all public knowledge now. He wrote a book about it. They're very proud of this. Anyway, they stoked a kind of a fake revolution against Mohammad Mossadegh, paying one side to fight. They would pay one mob to riot, and then they'd pay another mob to attack the other ones, to kind of create this chaos, in the streets of Tehran. Resulting in Mohammad Mossadegh kind of stepping down, the Shah coming back in, and he eventually died in prison, yeah. This is the British and American intelligence, behind this. And sure enough, Mossadegh was then removed, arrested, imprisoned. The oil deal was undone. The oil companies came back and, did better than ever. Saw the real boom in Iranian oil production. Anyway, this is one of those periods that activated, again, the Iranian street, which, really unbeknownst to the West, was a Muslim street still. The clerical class really activated in this period. This is the time when you see really the roots of the rise of Khomeini, Ruhollah Khomeini, which culminates then in the Iranian Revolution of 1978 and its success in 1979, which stunned the West. To have an Islamic revolution, like to have a state come into power, to unseat a Western-backed dictator, essentially, not with a communist regime, not with a Soviet-friendly, Eastern-friendly model, of governance, but a Muslim, people ruling in the name of Islam. And even if we, disagree with the method, or of course, these are 12 or Shia, they have their way, but they were acting in the name of Islam, and the West was stunned by this. 1979, next door, in Afghanistan, the communist regime comes into power, against, actually it was a communist coup, I believe, against the preceding monarch. People revolt against it. The Soviets invade Afghanistan, at least by 1980. And the Muslims of Afghanistan organized to repel this foreign invasion. And the Soviets, this is one of the top two most powerful militaries of this time, of course. Took 8 years, really, to do this. Famously, the U.S. kind of overblows their role in this, the U.S. overstates their role in this, but because these were Muslims opposing a Soviet invasion, the U.S. did support it in some way. They did support the Afghan Mujahideen. And you see in this time, there's a great photo that you can find online still of Ronald Reagan, former U.S. President Ronald Reagan. He was president from 1980 to 88, or 81 to 89. Inviting the leaders of the Mujahideen or representatives of the Afghan Mujahideen to the White House. There's a picture of him sitting in, I believe it's the Oval Office. I don't never been there, but one of the rooms of the White House, and he's sitting. So he's wearing his suit, and they're all wearing their shalwar kameez and beautiful, turbans like of the Afghan style. After this meeting, he says to the media that these men are and this is a direct quote, I believe. I don't even think I'm paraphrasing. As I remember it word for word, that these men are the moral equivalent of our founding fathers. That's what he said. And alhamdulillah, the Muslims were victorious in I believe it was 1988. I think the Soviets finally, was it late 87 or 88, I forget now. The Soviets evacuated. Yeah.
Brother, my mom, she was like living there during that time.
Are you serious? One along, okay.
She said that.
Oh yeah, you said, yeah, she was Afghan, right?
It was like
Mhm.
the Russians.
I said Soviets, but Russians. Yeah, the Russians, Soviets. Yeah, exactly.
They wanted
Same.
like gold or something like that, or like some natural resources.
There's some mineral wealth there, and then there was broader geopolitical kind of interest in controlling that zone, and definitely, I mean, the Soviet Union was very much interested in controlling as much of its surroundings as possible, naturally. Yeah, Soviets were just, at that time, because Russia was operating kind of in a union, with the other Soviet states, that's why I just refer to that as the Soviets, the USSR at that time. But yes, it's Russians, for sure. Russian-speaking, Russian people. Okay, on the heels of the Iranian Revolution in Lebanon, you have the rise of the Hezbollah movement, right? Very much directly inspired. I mean, they say straight up, we report to Iran, which in the history of Lebanon is very interesting. I mean, and very important. However we feel about Hezbollah today, after the last 15 years in Syria, I mean, in that time, from the 80s, 90s into the 2000s, I mean, this is a tremendous development. Very important to study. Another, just an example of the revival of Islam as a politically motivating force, as a military force within the Muslim world. 1990s in Algeria, you have after the French had been finally repelled a couple of decades earlier these were Muslims but operating under a leftist framework. Then you have the rise of Islamic politics, of an Islamic political movement in Algeria, the Islamic Salvation Front, I believe, Ali Ben Hajj, and who won the elections, basically, who decided they were going to participate in the peaceful, democratic process, won elections, convincingly, and then the military, with French support, came in and removed them from power, imprisoned the leaders, basically sending the message, that the democratic process is not for you, even if you do things our way, that if people, formerly colonized people, choose the wrong leaders, according to the West, we'll come in and fix that for you. Algeria is one of those great case studies. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but 2006 in Gaza, electing the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, into leadership of Gaza, same thing, it was met with blockade and war upon them. Egypt, in 2013, electing representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, being met with military coup. We sent the message again and again, that you can have elections as long as you elect people that we want. Back to the Palestinian case, after decades of the Palestinian resistance being mostly motivated, or at least organized by leftist organizations, the PLO, Fatah, the birth of Hamas, in the 1980s is a really important development, in Palestinian resistance, led by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and others, who see it as their mission, who felt that this resistance should be led by Islam. It's a question that brings a lot of us here today. I mean, this is kind of the question underpinning why we're here, is how do we do this as Muslims? We see efforts, we see campaigns. Sorry for the footnote, but we see efforts and campaigns in our current society. Muslims who are doing the work of trying to protect, for example, the civil rights, of Muslims in America, or promoting the acceptance more broadly or loosely of Muslims in America, the anti-Islamophobia campaigns, and I hate this word, but you know what I'm talking about by this. That many of these campaigns are done in coalition with groups who seem to have like very different interests than us more broadly. I mean, they seem to sometimes even have totally cross purposes. And so we wonder, is this the right way? Like, do these coalitions make sense? And I'm not, I'm not going to answer that right now. I mean, it's bigger than that. But it at least helps us understand the tension that exists in all these countries that I just mentioned. When goal is being sought, through means, that seems disconnected from Islam, basically. Sometimes even contrary to Islam. And so the Palestinians have their way, the movement. And, in some ways it's the inheritors of kind of the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood movement, but the Palestinian case is different. They have their own organization. Now, many more examples than this. These are like some real, just big kind of pillars of kind of this trend. So we went from the 50s into the 80s, into the 90s, excuse me. Algeria is the 90s. And then, okay, let's pause in the 90s. Because with the revival of Islam and political Islam, we noted that in Afghanistan, in the 80s, the US was happy with it. The Soviets were on the wrong side of that one. But with the end of the Cold War, with the fall of the Soviet Union, right, the breaking apart of the Soviet Union, the U.S. is the last remaining superpower, of the world. It becomes a unipolar world, right, where you're either with the U.S. or you're not. At some level, I don't think this is the main reason, but at some level, there are industries, the military-industrial complex needs an enemy, to be able to continue producing weapons. I think there's certain interests, that want conflicts, but I don't think that's the main reason. I think the suspicion of Islam was bigger than that. And there were also Muslims, within the Muslim world who, after dealing with Russia, saw the U.S. as the bigger enemy, as a remaining enemy. Maybe not for America's own sake, not because of like American domestic politics, but because of the American role in supporting Israel and supporting oppressors within the Muslim world. Now, the Palestinian resistance, though, was the stated cause for the beginning of the war on terror. And not the war on terror that's announced after 9/11. But the war on terror that begins under the Clinton administration, you remember President Bill Clinton. And it's in those years, I think 1996, the first laws go into place first making a list of terrorist organizations. The U.S. Treasury has a list of organizations that are banned. These groups are terrorist organizations. And a law went into place banning material support, meaning giving money or giving services, right, to an organization that's deemed by the U.S. a terrorist organization is a crime, major crime, federal crime. This was done at the behest of the Israeli lobby in the U.S., starting with mostly Palestinian resistance organizations and Hezbollah and others, although then, of course, it very quickly became bigger than that. Even the definition of material support expanded very quickly to include not just material support, but even services, legal services, sometimes interpreted even as certain types of speech, that done at the behest of such an organization. So politically, you can say that I agree with this organization. That's legal, technically, if you can defend yourself. But if you organized with this group, or if someone from this group told you to say something, or if you were doing promo, or you're doing PR on their behalf, that's a crime in the U.S. Former President Jimmy Carter, after his presidency, always maintained close ties with, trying to solve the Palestinian crisis more broadly, but he has an organization called the Humanitarian Law Project. Did he die recently? Did Jimmy Carter die? No, not yet. No, I know he was old, but he was I didn't mean to like celebrate it. He seemed like a nice guy. But I thought I had read that somewhere. He had a organization called the Humanitarian Law Project. If Jimmy Carter's still alive, man, law guide Jimmy Carter. Oh, why not? Let's make the law. Although he might have passed away. I'm sorry? He's 99. Okay. Good. He had a famous case that went up to the Supreme Court. Sorry for that digression. It's 3 a.m. The Humanitarian Law Project, had a project where they were going to offer legal services to registered terrorist organizations to help them transition out of militancy, to transition into the peaceful democratic process. There was talks about doing that with Hamas, but I think also they wanted to do that with the PKK in Turkey, a leftist Kurdish organization. It went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided that even that would be material support for terrorism, so that even the former president of the U.S. could not help a terrorist organization try to become not a terrorist organization. That would be a legal service, which would be banned under this material support law. Just to clarify for you the scope of this. Yeah. Yeah, that's a much bigger issue. If you were kidnapped and forced to do things. I think if you were kidnapped, they would understand. If you, I don't know. I actually have no idea. There was a case like that too, wasn't it? Where people people get put on video and they have to say things with the video. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure. There might be an example like that though. Okay. I'm in Tampa right now. I just remembered. We're in Tampa. So this might be a story that you guys know. Dr. Sammy, yeah, exactly. A mentor of mine who I love very much, and spent many years in this area. I guess let me just give like a quick SparkNotes version of this story. In the late 90s, under these terrorism laws that I just mentioned, under the Clinton administration. Again, this is not Bush yet. This is Bill Clinton. The several Palestinian American men are arrested under secret evidence. There's no charges. They're not charged with a crime. There's no evidence. At least there's no evidence shared, why they were arrested. They're basically just disappeared, really under the orders of Israel. Israel requests, really, that the U.S. picks these men up. One of them is the brother-in-law of Dr. Sami al-Arian. Many of them were I think most of them were in the Florida area. At least one of them, were in the South Florida, in the Central Florida area. It inspires Dr. Sami and others to organize a campaign against this practice, against the, in defense of, people's right to see a trial, to have their charges mentioned. These are very basic American things. They're in the Bill of Rights, whatever. There seemed to be an exception for some reason. It wasn't clear why. We know why, but it wasn't clear, how it would be justified legally. They were making no progress in the courts. And so they organized a political campaign, to try to get it done from the legislative process. And they did. They focused on this. They worked with the Congress people, Senate, raised money, held public events, media campaigns, to push for a law, to push a bill through the Congress, culminating in its acceptance by the House and the Senate, to ban the practice of secret evidence being used to detain, to arrest, to imprison people in the U.S. It sounds so basic. Hey, why do you need a new law to say something that's already in the law? But this was, it was just a way of kind of raising attention. It went all the way up you know, and the Clinton administration was on its way out, and they had no interest. The Clinton administration said straight up, "We're not going to deal with this. You know, we're not going to touch this." And so it went to the campaign leaders, went to the presidential campaign in the year 2000. Most of you guys were probably born after this. Right? This is when were you guys born? Who's the oldest one here? So I was in middle school and then high school in these years. In 2000, the election was between George W. Bush and someone named Al Gore. Al Gore was the Democrat. He was Clinton's vice president, and then he was running for president. And they approached both campaigns. Neither campaign was very interested. Gore's campaign was even less interested. His vice president was a famous Zionist named Joe Lieberman, who I think did just die the other day. Joe Lieberman, I believe. I did see that one recently. Anyway, Muslims would have been split on this election anyway. You know, I don't think they, you know, on traditional lines, you know, certain people might have leaned more Democrat in that election. Some would have leaned more Republican for various reasons. When this issue went to them, you know, no one really dealt with it right away. Bush was trailing a couple points, and they were worried about some of the swing states in particular. And Muslims were very well organized in Florida. Muslims had a number, you know, in Florida, especially because the organizers were here, the Palestinians, that they knew that they could flip the Florida vote either way. And so they told the Bush campaign, after Gore basically said no, straight up, they told the Bush campaign that if you can deal with this, if you support this campaign, we'll vote for you, right? I mean, and this is how political organizing is done. I mean, this is, sure enough, the one of the debates, the presidential debates, I think it was the last debate, if I remember. Sorry for the long version of the story. I'm sure you could find this written by Dr. Sami online someplace. But anyway, just since we're here, it culminates in the debate, a question is asked to the two candidates about discrimination, racial discrimination. And Gore, you know, speaks first, and he says, you know, yes, discrimination is wrong, racial discrimination is wrong. You know, a major case of this, example of this is driving while black. You know, black people are being pulled over and just stereotyped and discriminated against for their race, and this is wrong, I'm against it. Great. It's Bush's turn, George W. Bush, his turn. He goes up and he says, yes, this is wrong. Yes, driving while black is a major issue. And there's another example of discrimination against Americans, and it's discrimination against Arab Americans who are being held, you know, in prison using secret evidence, you know, and this is wrong and I'm against it. He gets on stage and his campaign manager I think he called Dr. Sami, if I remember correctly. He's like, you know, we did it. Like, I came through, you know, you gotta come through. And he's like, yes, you got it, you know, you did it. And sure enough, they did, and they organized the vote, you know, for George W. Bush in the 2000 election. And it was going to be signed. You know, the bill was going to be signed, and the Muslim leaders, many of the national Muslim leaders, you know, were famously not really very supportive of this campaign. It was a little bit radical for them, you know, to be on the Palestinian cause. But when it started getting successful, they joined on, and a meeting was scheduled at the White House for the signing of this bill. They were going to meet Bush, and the bill was going to be signed. And the day for the meeting was a Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. They were all in. The meeting was scheduled for like 10 o'clock or something. So all the national Muslim leaders were in D.C., which is why, after the events transpired, you know, 2 airplanes hit 2 buildings, and 3 buildings came down. The press conference at the White House, you know, Bush was surrounded by, you know, the national Muslim leadership. I mean, some of them, of course, live in D.C., but there were others, you know, who were there because they were there for the meeting, you know. It just didn't go that way. Yeah, the bill was just never heard of again, you know. After 9/11, you know, 9/11 justifies then, or is used to justify, really the outlawing of Islamic politics for a number of years, you know. I mean, there were, other than the wars, I mean, the foreign wars, I know you guys probably don't remember a time in your life when the U.S. was not literally occupying with troops in the Muslim world. But it was used to justify, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan and then Iraq. The same law that went into place, which gave the executive branch, which gave the president the legal right to just send the army, to send the military into really anywhere he wanted, was established then. The authorization to use military force, the AUMF, has been used again and again, to justify basically just doing whatever they want with the U.S. military. The Congress doesn't have to declare war on a country. The president can just say, I want to send the military there because it's related to terrorism. Right? So it just gave the president the unilateral authority to make global war, basically. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, please. Take a sec.
Do you suggest that there's a correlation between the date to sign the bill and the event of 9/11?
I'm not. No. I don't think it was a. It's just a crazy punchline of the story. It's just, yeah. It's
That's kind of like that's like a really big coincidence. Though.
It's crazy. There's a lot of crazy coincidences with that day.
I don't know,
Yeah.
but that really does sound like there's a correlation.
It's crazy. I mean, for years, okay, I know we're on camera, whatever. For years, I was a real conspiracy theorist around 9/11. There's definitely some big questions still, that need to be answered. And I said that for a reason. 2 buildings got hit, 3 came down. There's big questions, around what happened, in the World Trade Center in particular, and then more broadly, for sure. Can people who only train how to fly a plane using a computer simulator, get a plane into a building, and can 2 of them do it, 2 for 2? There's questions. I mean, I don't know. I was pushing I was really questioning this very publicly for many years until one of the Guantanamo lawyers, one of the lawyers representing the guys in Guantanamo, I was doing an event with one of them, and he took me aside and he's like, yeah, I think they did it, these guys. Okay, fine, I'll let it go. Doesn't answer all the questions, but bukhair, I mean, I don't know. It's above my knowledge. But in the war that followed, there was the foreign invasions, but even domestically, the foreign war on terror, quote unquote. Every time I say war on terror, imagine me putting like dramatic scare quotes around it. It's because who is the terror in this war? But the domestic war on terror was perhaps even more productive, even more fruitful for the U.S. There were assassinations, imprisonments, torture, and then propaganda and soft power, There was then the choosing, really, of leaders from above. I mean, we saw really a generation of leaders, Dr. Sami being one of the first victims of this, but many others. Much of our leadership class just kind of being cut down, either by exile, deportation, imprisonment, political prosecution sometimes. Political leaders, charity leaders, the nonprofit leaders, the lobbyists, even that political class who was very much embedded in the U.S. political system. These are not militants or whatever, like these, not radicals, but just anyone with too much power, anyone with too much ability to organize people, where. And those leaders were replaced. There was a plan for the replacing of those leaders and for the creation of a new leadership class, that would soften, and fashion the American Muslim citizen. There's a report by the RAND by the RAND organizations, think tank. It was published before 9/11, I think. But the plan was for how to. The title's escaping me now. I'm freestyling, but the purpose of this, the stated purpose of this report was basically how to shift, the American Muslim population through the leadership, and it broke it down into segments. It broke Muslims into segments, like, how to use, the integrationists against the more radical, radical, quote unquote. I'm a radical. I mean that in a good way, but I guess more radical Muslims. how to use the civil rights advocates, against those, and the political leaders, how to use the liberals, against those, how to use the like real deviant Muslims against those. Like there was this kind of hierarchy of things, and the more that they felt like a group, could be aligned with their interests, they would try to promote them over the one that was 1 degree less, Some Muslim leaders were really brought into the inside, There were some of the most popular preachers of that decade, were built right in the days after 9/11, were brought to the White House and offered, and then promoted in the media as like the solution to Islamic radicalism. And then, as Muslim lay people like us, were weakened and demoralized in different ways, the vision is beaten out of us, in some ways. Market dynamics create a demand for a preacher, for a scholar or a leader, quote unquote, that is essentially compliant, that is not willing to challenge really some of the most difficult issues of the day. Again, we had something of a dip, even amidst wars in the Muslim world. Opposition to those wars fell to the leftists and the non-profits and the allies of the Muslim community at that time. The Muslims, had to either take a back seat or their rhetoric had to align with the way that the war was being opposed. Prisoners, Guantanamo, still open today. 150 guys still in Guantanamo Bay, in the prison there. 25 years later almost. 23 years later. And still within the Muslim community, for many years, the leading voices opposing that, and opposing the entrapment cases, and surveillance, and the informants, and the provocateurs, in the masjid, in these cases, the leading voices for a long time were like the leftist Muslim youth, and I say that with respect. This was, they met a need, we got honor that. But there came to be a divide, which I think we're still seeing some of the effects of, between like a Muslim scholarly class, which was less interested or less involved in politics, and then the politics of the Muslims being led by kind of the more left-leaning, liberal activists. Right? Something of a trope, I know, this is a broad trend, but this is kind of a general division that many of us who have been kind of in this space for the last 15 years, have become aware of, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, how come, in history, not, all the time, but most of the time, it's even with the Crusaders, and even, just recently, the non-Muslims are able to, divide, the Muslims so easily, they just say it, and then they get almost it actually does happen, but, and, the Muslims, they actually, follow along with it, they don't do, even when it happens, they don't, really try and get back together again.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't want to make it all sound bad. I don't want to say, I don't think that it's not, and actually, and this is really my point, is that, Allah uses some people against others, this give and take is part of the flow of history, of course. This is, we're warned of this, We're also taught through the Quran and the prophetic practice, of the qualities, that allow us to be in a better position to attain victory, to protect ourselves from those plots. And those qualities, of course, within us over time and within our people more broadly over time, ebb and flow. Sometimes, even as individuals, sometimes we're stronger. We feel very strong in our, very committed, we're very focused, we're able to kind of dodge. And sometimes we're in a position where, we can get tricked, or we can get pressured, Allah keep us firm, Allah keep us firm, but this is, it's natural, this is human nature, and it's not, so I don't want to make it seem like we always get beat up, throughout history. That's not my point at all. In fact, really my purpose of today was because I think we left last night kind of on a down note, at a very difficult point in Islamic history. What I hope to do leading up to this point was to show that there was a revival, right, of a very strong Muslim politics, right, which now I'm just punctuating with this story of the war on terror to kind of help us understand the moment that we're in right now as American Muslims. That's my, so we have this, we got this, now we're kind of here right now. Okay, that's my point. Yeah.
But it didn't happen with the prophet, like Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, like the Sahabas. Like you don't see that though.
Yes, for sure. And this was the best. This is the best generation. But they started at a point of, I don't want to, not weakness, but I mean like a political weakness. They were oppressed. Violently oppressed. They had to literally fight wars of survival. Battles of survival. There were points even within their lives, within the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, before Badr, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ask Allah, like if we lose this battle, this is the end of this deen. Ask for victory. And so, but the qualities that gave them that victory. This is why yesterday, where we started, the first thing we said here yesterday evening, was that when we are presented with different narratives about Islam, our safest and most strongest foundation will be rating those against the way that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum understood Islam. That if we, how did they understand? What were the priorities that they had? What were the qualities? I mean, like you said, what are the qualities that they had? That gave them that victory. And so if we see today, of course, there's a lot of different voices. There's debates. Some people say, oh, Islam says this. People say Islam says that. But we want to take those back to our firm foundations, and understand, And let me see how far we have to go here. Let me say this now. There's a famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just because it answers this point, it speaks to this point directly. Where the Prophet ﷺ said to his companions, the people he was with, that the day will come and the nations of the world will gather around you, like people calling each other to a feast. Meaning like the ummah is in the middle and people are feasting on you. And they're going to be calling each other to it. And the companions were kind of horrified by this, because they weren't planning on losing, And they said, well, is it because we'll be few in number? And he said, no, you'll be many, but you'll be useless, like the scum on the top of the water, like on top of the ocean, just floating this way. And Allah will remove the fear of you from their hearts. Meaning that when Muslims are strong, the enemies are afraid of us. Like they wouldn't mess with us. He's saying the time will come, you're going to be a lot of you, but no one's going to be afraid of you. Kind of interesting. It's one of the reasons I don't like that Islamophobia word. It's a kind of really useless concept. And he said, and the Prophet said in this hadith, Allah will cast wahan into your hearts. And they asked, what is wahan? He said, it's the love of this worldly life, and a hatred of death. I mean, like when you love your life, that's the end of the narration. Is it when you're obsessed with your life and your world, your material world, your career and your things and your pleasures of this life, and you're afraid to risk it. That's the best way you can say it. Not that we don't want death, but I mean but you're afraid to risk it, that this creates a situation in which, you're more easily manipulated. That's how I understand that hadith. And so what that says to us is not to be fatalistic about it. It's not that like, oh, all is lost, The point is that over time, these qualities, of course, with our actions, with our discipline, with our self-development, we can attain these qualities. We can strengthen these qualities, or with our distraction, with our investment in the world, with our, just messing around too much, we can lose these qualities, right? And you can see it within a lifetime. Within someone's lifetime, you can see this go up and down. And with a community, you can see this go up and down. And with our ummah globally. So that's my intention. And I say that to say, may Allah keep us firm and give us the best qualities of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Make us truly inheritors of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, okay, I'm going to finish up now. Let's see. Oh no, we're going to end on a good note though. So we've discussed the war on terror. And what happens is, really, like I said, an outlawry of Islamic politics. Yesterday we spent a long time talking about Khilafah, as an ethic, as like a spirit, as well as an institution. And we talked about jihad, about struggle, a little bit, briefly, that's kind of underpinning everything we're talking about. Those two words, have become very bad words in most Islamic spaces. You don't hear them much in the masjid anymore, for reasons. But Islamic beliefs, most broadly, and Islamic politics are one of the greatest challenges to the Western world order that has become really dominant over the whole world. And so this became a focus of the war on terror, is whoever can be won using soft power, then good. They use that. And whoever can't be swayed using soft power gets the boot, gets the boot on the neck. And that's true internationally as well. If countries can, if they can just move the government, using trade agreements or, benefits here and there, then great. We'll let them live. We'll let them rule. But if they don't play the game, we're going to send in the intelligence, and if that doesn't work, we're going to send in the troops. And more broadly, for 100 years, perhaps, even Western historians and scientists have said publicly, written, that Islam would be the last civilization to stand against the West. Oswald Spengler, famous German, he's got a great 2,000-page book on the decline of the West. This is a great book. You were keeping book titles? Who's keeping book titles? I was taking notes of book titles. Oh, my brother. The Decline of the West. Fascinating take. He looks at all these different civilizations and how the rise and the fall of civilizations. He had other books too, but that's the main, kind of the masterwork. 1916, this book comes out. World War I. He's writing The Decline of the West. They had publishing back then, yeah. yeah, they did. They didn't have PDFs though. Now you can get the PDF. It's a lot easier than carrying 2,000 pages around. Although my eyes hurt just thinking about reading 2,000 pages on my phone, it just gave me a headache. Anyway, he said, that Islam would be the last civilization. I'm paraphrasing. That Islam would be the last really people, the last worldview that would stand against the West. Okay. The war on terror did not really end, is my point. The war on terror did not really ever end. Sometimes, for years now, even colleagues of mine and I, we've been discussing, did it end? Or did someone win? Did the terror win? Did the U.S. win? I don't know. Afghanistan, after 19 years, the U.S. just basically had to give up and leave. And the Taliban was able to reestablish the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And by all accounts, they're doing a great job of it. Iraq was, Saddam Hussein obviously did not last very long, but the U.S. also kind of mostly had to leave Iraq. And basically lost Iraq to the Iranian axis, kind of, the sphere of power. Yeah.
Yeah, so we recently met with someone who came from Afghanistan.
Okay.
And they were saying even though they came into power, the Taliban, they're not ruling by Sharia.
Okay, I can't speak to it. I don't know. Afghanistan is a famously famously large and difficult to exert like real comprehensive rule over. I mean, it's naturally, I think rule there was decentralized. So, you know, if they control Kabul, you know, I don't know how much, you know, they can be responsible for what happens in each place. And I don't know. It's beyond my knowledge. I can't say. There's some Shia too. Yeah, that's true.
Did they have to deal with a lot of internal corruption?
They do a lot of internal corruption. You know, they still have a ton of their wealth is tied up in, you know, in U.S. You know, U.S. has blocked a lot of the wealth, you know, also that is theirs. There's a ton of issues, you know, facing them. So we just make dua for them, and you know, it's yeah.
You also inherited like a war-torn country.
Inherited a war-torn country, 20 years is destroyed. It's like absolutely, there's a ton of issues. I think we should definitely offer all of our empathy, all of our sympathy, you know, and understanding, and all of our patience, you know, with them. I mean, they have a huge job ahead of them, but inshallah, they'll be the right people for it. So Afghanistan, Iraq, all these goals, you know, these goals that they had. I mean, what does the U.S. have to show for it? I mean, they made a lot of money on it. Some people made a lot of money on this, of course. You know, even if they can't count these countries as being under their political influence anymore, you know, a lot of money got spent. You know, a lot of money got spent on weapons and the military. This is the military-industrial complex, you know, which we mentioned. And domestically, though, I think this domestic war on terror was more useful for them than the foreign one. You know, I think we broadly were fashioned into American Muslim citizens, you know, unfortunately, I think, you know. We've also accepted surveillance. I mean, it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it was very controversial to think that, you know, they would have a microphone in a masjid listening to what we say. You know, now we put the microphone in our masjid to let everyone know what we say. You know, the idea that they'd be listening to our phones, you know, was like, you guys don't remember this. Like 15 years ago, this was a big deal. Like first of all, we didn't have smartphones, but the idea that they'd be tapping our phones was like immoral, illegal, something to be opposed, like something to be horrified by. It was a sign that the social contract, that the political contract was void. Like, it was like, this was like a really horrible thing. And now it's like, it's probably in the terms and conditions somewhere. Like, it pops up and I'm like, approve, you know, sure, whatever. We just assume that they know everything that we do, everything that we think. I mean, I have a thought and then Instagram advertises it to me. So I assume that they have a very good idea of, you know, of what we're up to at all times. It's become permanent, basically. The war on terror. See, I was talking about the microphone and let me know. So it happens. Sometimes I live in Istanbul and I'm talking to my brother on the phone. You know, and if I mention like the name of a country or something, all of a sudden I hear like a click, a click in the background, and then my voice gets distant. Like, oh man, I had to switch the tape. But anyway, most of the structure of the war on terror has become permanent. We've just kind of accepted this kind of our new reality, is my point. And permanent global war. That AUMF I mentioned, you know, the U.S. still operates under this. You know, Biden can just order. This actually came up recently with Yemen. You know, when the Houthi movement and the Ansar Allah movement took control of the Red Sea, more or less. You know, it started at least harassing, you know, some of the shipping that was going to Israel in recent months, and the U.S. started bombing Yemen. You know, started bombing the Ansar Allah targets within southwestern Yemen. To their credit, a couple of journalists did ask the question, like, under what authority is the Biden administration just bombing Yemen, like, directly? You know, bombing the Houthis. Like, what does this have to do with this AUMF that was passed back in 2002 and 2003, you know, related to Al-Qaeda and this and that? And the White House did not have a good answer for this. I mean, the Pentagon did not have a good answer for this. They just kind of kept repeating the same thing. But sorry, Dawood, what were you saying?
Oh, I thought Biden was
Chill? He's a little too chill. But when I say Biden, though, I mean the machine that animates him. I mean the system around him. Because if he's not awake enough to be making the decisions, they're being done in his name. And So yeah, he's an enemy like the rest of them. Okay, khair. Let's. Okay, great. Let's just end with. Oh yeah, it's almost 3:30. Let's end with Philistine. Allah free them, grant them victory, and use us to support that victory also. I mean, 10/7, October 7th, is one of those historical days, the days of the days of Allah. Like this is like this was one of those days that we'll look back on as old men, inshallah, and think like, wow, this was a turning point, in the history of the Muslim world. It was a great sign, that the resistance there is alive and well, that they're still motivated, that they're still strong, stronger than ever. I mean, that that they have a network behind them. We have to give credit where it's due. I mean, they did not do it alone, obviously. I mean, they did it. I mean, they sacrificed alone, but they did it because of a network behind them that facilitated this. But I want to, that's not our job necessarily. We're not, us personally are not attached to that or useful to that. Rather, I'm interested also, though, in the global reaction to it, in the swell of support from not just the Muslim world, but even non-Muslim Americans, for 10/7 and for the Palestinian cause more broadly. It's different. You guys may not remember this, but for years, anytime that Palestinian resistance, would engage militarily, with the Zionist power, Muslims would get this pressure to condemn it, and to distance themselves from it, to say, oh, this isn't us, It was interesting though, 10/7, after years of, just taking, beatings, for them to pull off 10/7. Alhamdulillah. I mean, of course, there were some people who kind of had that old pattern still, and they felt they had to condemn, or they were put on TV like the same day, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's not us. We don't." But very quickly, alhamdulillah, there was a swell of support. I think first it actually came from outside the Muslims. I mean, definitely in Istanbul we were celebrating, but like in America, I think first, the internet culture really changed it. I think like the meme culture, like it was the Instagram leftists, were able to like. To see like pro-Hamas jokes, online, like on Instagram, it sounds funny. It sounds like, light, but this is a major shift, right, in American political culture. It's a major shift in American media culture, And Muslims also, I think, then felt a little bit more comfortable, also engaged in this, feeling like, yeah, these are our guys, And I think is one of the reasons, that the crackdown, that the savagery there, and the crackdown in media and on campuses here has been so severe, is because they've realized that they lost the battle for the hearts and minds. There's just no, like, when people defend Israel today, they just sound like robots. And everyone can tell, the journalists can tell. Maybe they have their editor beating them up to like, change the wording here and there. But like people know, like if you're a human being and you see it, people know, And it's not just like, oh, we support the Palestinians as victims, but people respect and support Palestinian resistance. That they understand that Palestinians have to do this for themselves. That it's not going to be solved with some two-state solution and it's going to be divided and whatever that. No, they understand that this has to go the way of Algeria or Rhodesia or Algeria or French Indochina or whatever, all these places. Like, this is a decolonial effort and it's going to be successful one day, inshallah. And so, alhamdulillah, I think that time for condemnations is over. That time for slavishness, is over. And we can demonstrate our courage. We leave here, we'll leave this month empowered, take these qualities on. We try to maintain dignity. living here. We're not here hiding. We're not here embarrassed or, we walk out of here as men. That there are things more important than our lives. There's things more important than our worldly possessions. We love Allah and His Messenger. And we love our people. We love justice. We want to see this world organized in the best way. We want to remove the veils between people and their Lord. So if I could end, this is the real end now. I've done this like 3 times now, but this is my real last point. I just had a number of points, especially since I'm talking to mostly young men. I don't know if there's any sisters on the other side or at home, but it may be universal, but especially because I'm talking to my young brothers here, I want to say this very specifically. There's a few points, just kind of a program, and I'm reminding myself first, this is a personal program, They might allow us to prepare for whatever's next. I think about to live a coherent life. One is to learn the deen, as best as you can. Learn it from the old books. The YouTube content is great. The halakat and all these things are very important. But again, take it back to the old texts. Take it back to our sources. Learn the deen as it was understood, by the people who understood it best. And read and memorize, understand the Quran. Build a real close relationship with the Quran. Make that your daily companion. And what it prioritizes. When you read the Quran, especially let me also say, we don't say this enough. If you don't understand Arabic, work on your Arabic. But if you don't understand Arabic enough to understand the Quran as you're reading it, read it also in a language that, with a translation that you understand very well. So that way you get a sense of its priorities. You get a sense of, that message let us speak to you. Although you definitely want to get the Arabic right, that's a priority, but both. 2, improve your, improve your character. Improve your character personally. Get hard on yourself and be easy on other people. You know what I mean? This is true for all of your relationships. When you get married, you'll understand even better. But it's true for your friendships too, and your family relationships in all directions. Be as hard on, not hard. Hard is not the right word, but be as demanding on yourself as is healthy. And be as easy on other people as you can. Be gentle with people. Low expectations, as best as you can. High expectations for yourself, low for others. Serve them. Serve your family and friends as a khalifa. Serve the people around you. And humble your ego. 3, encourage your brothers or sisters, whoever's listening. Encourage your brothers and sisters to do good things and do them together. It's a great thing, great way to build the bonds like you guys are doing here. Spend the time together, encourage each other to do good things together. The people that you don't see enough, find something good to do together, like study together, do halakat together, exercise together, serve together, feed people together, things like this. 4, on that last note, get physically dangerous. All of you, train, get in crazy shape, prepare for everything, get the weights in, get the running, if you can't run, if you can't run 5 miles, if you have an enemy behind you, start practicing, if you had a wild animal chasing you, you think you can get away, if you can't, just run. That's something that, when the adrenaline kicks in, that only gets you so far, these are things that you have to prepare for. I really encourage you. Now, that's just a very practical reason, but there's other things. It's just good for you. It's good for your heart. You're going to see, if you feel stressed, you feel any depression, you feel anxieties, man, that exercise really does so much. And sometimes we don't appreciate it until we get a little bit older. But I encourage you now. Start build it into your day. Build it into your week. Get that exercise in. You don't have to get jacked, but get strong. Get your heart and lungs. They need to get them in shape. Please. Okay. 5. This is gonna sound funny, but it's a weird time. Get handsome and wealthy, and get married and have children. There's a lot of poison. There's a lot of poisonous voices I see. More online than in person. People don't talk this way in person. But online, there's really a lot of weird gender war stuff. That women are all like this and men are all like this. And, undermining marriage and say, oh, marriage isn't good for us. Anyway, it's weird stuff. Some of this is non-Muslims because they have a whole different set of issues. But those things are creeping into here. Within the Muslim world, especially in Muslim men's spaces, I'm seeing a lot of this. It's kind of mirroring what's happening in the non-Muslim internet. So let's be very careful. Guard your heart against that. We love our women. Our women, they're different from us. Totally. I mean, not totally, but very different. Absolutely. But those differences are by divine design. We love our women, protect our women, and absolutely, make that intention to, when you're able to get married, have children, build this ummah. 6, build the society you want to see. This Islamic social work. I mean, I had some critical remarks about different types of politics, but our political work is one of service. So if you want to, people say like, oh, you don't. When I criticize voting and like political electioneering and stuff, I say, they say, oh, what we're not supposed to do anything? No. Educate people, feed people, give them shelter, healthcare. Like, so those services that we want the government to do, we can provide them. We should provide them. And actually, I know this area is actually way ahead of a lot of the country on this, but these should be our priorities. 7, if you do find yourself in a position where you're engaging with political leaders, I suggest that as nationally and even globally, we should unite on very basic things. And it's not Islamophobia or, whatever. If we're going to unite, it's very simple things. End the wars, free the prisoners, remove the puppets, and stop taxing us. Those are 4 very basic things that I think you would find coherent with the Islamic tradition, with the way that Muslims dealt with politics around the world. If we want anything from this U.S. government in particular, we're in America, if we want anything from the U.S. government, it's those things. Stop the wars, free the prisoners, remove your puppets from the Muslim world, and drop the taxes. These are things that I think we should unite on. And anything else that's a distraction to those should be deprioritized. And finally, my very last thing is long-term, think about building ties outside of this country too. I mean, I'm an American. My passport is here, whatever. My family is here. But long-term, build ties outside of this country. Think about getting out of here. Spending time overseas. If you have lands back home, if you have like a home place that you're from, or your parents or your grandparents are from, build ties there. If you don't, then just get comfortable in the Muslim world. Get comfortable with the ummah. Like, get comfortable someplace. There's places to go, places to see, languages to learn. Don't feel like this is the only place for me. It's probably gonna get weird. It's probably gonna get weird here. More and more. Not that we can't stick it out. Not that we can't deal with those problems as they come. But for your kids' sake, think about building those ties and becoming men of the world, inshallah. Okay, that's really all I have. Sorry, I talked a little bit longer than I expected, but I guess we started late. Please forgive me for wasting any of your time. If there's anything I said that was wrong or misguidance in any way, I ask Allah to forgive me. It was my own weaknesses and my own ignorance. And if there's anything good in this, it's to the credit of our teachers and those people who are patient to teach us. And I'm just transmitting, what I've learned and what I've understood. But thank you guys for your time. I'll sit with you guys. Anything that you guys want to talk about, if you have questions. I'm glad that you guys were throwing them in when you had them. But if you have questions or things you just want to talk about, or comments, concerns, criticisms, whatever, this is the time, please. I would love to hear it now, inshallah.